on occasions, don't we have a problem with our ambassadors reflecting a case of clientitis in which they become so close to the country to which they've been accredited that they, in effect, start speaking for the country instead of speaking for the United States? Haven't we had that on occasion?
Yes, sir, we certainly have. I've even been accused of it myself on occasion.
Mm-hmm. Well, it occurs to me that the President might well be accused of that in this instance with respect to China. And I notice in your speech, in your statement, you make reference to the fact that his experience over the years in dealing with China and his personal acquaintance, of course, he was our representative there in the very early days, and it seems to me at least that he's reflecting this very problem that we worry about afflicting our ambassadors from time to time. Let me ask you this question. On the 5th of June, after this brutal massacre in Tiananmen Square, the President took certain steps. He then followed those measures with additional ones on the 20th of June. Now, one of the additional measures he took on June 20th was to order the suspension of high-level exchanges of government officials with China. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you said that promptly led to the cancellation of scheduled trips to Beijing by Commerce Secretary Mossbacher and Treasury Secretary Brady. When did you and Scowcroft go to Beijing the first time?
July 14th, I think. I don't remember the exact date, but it was in July, I think. July 4th weekend.
July 4th weekend? That wasn't a symbolic date about holding certain truths to be self-evident, was it, on your part?
I wish I'd just said early July, Senator, but anyway, no, it wasn't.
When did the trip of July 4th begin to be planned?
I would guess the middle of the preceding week, a few days before then. Not many days before.
So within a week after ordering a measure, additional measures, including the suspension of high-level exchanges, the administration undertook a high-level exchange. Is that correct?
I will make a semantic distinction which is important to us, although it may not be as important to you, between exchanges and contacts. The point what the President was getting at with regard to the ending of exchanges was, for example, a Commerce Secretary going to visit Beijing, a return visit by his vis-a-vis coming here, that this was a different issue, not exchanges, but a contact. But nevertheless, to make your point, the President decided to send us, despite his general decision that there should be no further exchanges with the Chinese.
And that was a secret visit, obviously.
Yes, sir.
Would you say if it had been known publicly that everyone would have perceived it to be in contradiction of the suspension of the high-level exchanges?
I don't know the answer to that, Senator. I think if it had been explained at the time, it would have been viewed differently.
I will state for the record, I think it would have been perceived by virtually everyone as being in contradiction of this undertaking barely 10 days earlier not to have high-level visits. Now, subsequent to that visit, in which I take it you tell us you and General Scowcroft stated U.S. concerns in very explicit terms. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Is it correct that the Chinese government proceeded to detain or arrest thousands of people after your first visit? You made this visit. You came back. You then looked to see what was happening. What was happening? I mean, my understanding is they detained, let me just lay it out for you, detained or arrested more than 10,000 people, harshly imprisoned more than 800 persons for counter-revolutionary crimes, some placed in jail for 10 years or more, in some instances simply for putting up posters calling for political reform. Over 1,000 students and workers were slain since the visit, and countless hundreds of others fled into hiding or exile. When you came back and looked at what was going on, didn't the repression continue?
Yes, sir, it did.
How long were you there on that visit?
About 24 hours. Again, it's, yeah, about 24 hours, I think.
Now, when you went back for the second visit, were you present when General Scowcroft made this toast that
Yes, sir, I was there.
attracted so much attention?
I was there.
Is it correct that he said that in both our societies there are voices of those who seek to redirect or frustrate our cooperation? We both must take bold measures to overcome these negative forces. Were you there when that was made?
Yes, I was.
What are the negative forces in this country to which General Scowcroft was referring?
As best I can describe it to you, Senator, they fit into two categories, I suppose. Those who, first of all, have never believed that there should have been an opening to China and believe this is confirmation of that fact. And those who look upon the relationship between the PRC and the United States as wholly dependent, and I emphasize the word wholly dependent, upon their human rights performance. The point that General Scowcroft was trying to make, and I would say that he had made some other statements in that same toast that were fairly clear criticisms of the Chinese, which haven't been covered as well. But nevertheless, the point I think the General was trying to make is that in this country there are those who would like to see the improvement of the relationship frustrated, either because they have never believed we should have a relationship with the PRC, or because, given what had happened at Tiananmen Square, that was in and of itself sufficient cause to break off the relationship and
When you and Scowcroft talked to the Chinese, did you say to them that you were upset by what they'd done, or that you really had to bring them a message that the American people and the Congress were upset, and that speaking to them as friend to friend, you wanted them to know this and that they needed to do something to address this attitude of the American people and the Congress and others, but that the administration certainly still wished to maintain this close and cordial relationship with the Chinese leadership?
As I said in the statement, Senator, first and foremost, we went, this is the first trip now, we went there to tell them of the President's horror and dislike for the events in Tiananmen Square. We made it clear, speaking for the President, that he was personally appalled. We went on to make it clear that the American people and the Congress were also appalled. There was no speaking as a friend. We would love to continue the relationship if you people would only understand that we're good guys, but the rest of the people, the rest of the United States are bad guys. There was none of that.
Well, I'm struck by this schizophrenic attitude on the part of the administration. The news reports today say that Secretary Baker warned the countries of Eastern Europe not to deviate from the path of democratic reform, which they are courageously pursuing at great cost. And yet the administration has resisted a comparable message to the Chinese. Let me ask you this question. Would the administration react if there were a comparable massacre either in Red Square or in one of the Eastern European countries, comparable to what took place in Tiananmen Square? Would your reaction be the same?
Senator, I can't possibly predict how the president would react under those circumstances to a
Well,
situation
but you in
like
an
that.
earlier question said that this response to China was country-specific. And I want to find out why.
That's
Why are you laying down, in effect, a double standard?
First of all, I don't think we're laying down a double standard. I think what I'm trying to say to you is that situations in individual countries will require individual reactions country by country. I do not think that means we're laying down a double standard. The point I was making with regard to the reaction to Tiananmen Square is that you should not assume from how that issue was handled anything with regard to similar circumstances in other countries, that the reason we dealt with the Chinese situation the way we did was because it is in fact China, because there is a long history of disagreement within the Chinese body politic itself as to whether they should isolate themselves from the rest of the world, whether they should open up to the rest of the world. There is a long history of debate within the Chinese body politic itself on whether economic and political reform is a good or a bad thing. We tried to tailor the way in which we told the Chinese of our horror about events in China to the specific circumstances of China.
Were you involved in making the decision that the trip should be made, or were you the recipient of an instruction to make the trip?
I was a recipient of an instruction.
On both occasions?
Yeah.
So the decision was made in the
Let
White
me say, if I had said I really didn't think I ought to go, I don't think they would have sent me. But I was instructed to go, and I went. But I do not, sir, want for 1 minute that statement of a fact to in any way indicate that I was anything other than ready to go and thought it was a wise thing to do.
Was the decision made in the White House?
Yes, sir.
Or solely, and not in the department?
There were discussions, I'm sure, between the President and Secretary of State on the subject, but the decision was the President's.